Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Today we're talking about a very important but often overlooked organ in the body, the liver. My guest is Dr. Russell Blaylock, author of the book, The Liver Cure: Natural Solutions for Fatty Liver, Celiac Disease, Inflammation, Hepatitis, Stress and Fatigue, Diabetes, Adrenal Stress, Leaky Gut, Cancer and Cirrhosis, Gallstones, Obesity, Bloating, Autoimmune Diseases, and SIBO. Dr. Blaylock, thanks for joining us. Great to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
So what made you decide to write this book? What's happening in American society among your patients that made you decide to write a book about the liver?
Well, what we're seeing is a tremendous increase in fatty liver disease, which is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is increased about 1980s when we first saw this. And we thought it was mostly in adults, but now we're seeing it in children. Something else happened in 1980 that explains a lot of it and is supported by the research, and that is the introduction of high fructose corn syrup into the food markets. With that increase, what we see is the high fructose corn syrup dramatically increases not only the fatty accumulation in the liver, but also it increases inflammation. And so that connection explained a lot of what we were seeing. The increase has continued, and we also connected to two other things, mainly obesity and type 2 diabetes. We see in obese individuals, the incidence of fatty liver disease is about 74%. And in diabetics, it's anywhere from 40 to 70% will have fatty liver disease. So because of that, I thought it was important to tell people how you can, number one, prevent the progression, because what we see is in the beginning, most of this fatty liver condition is rather benign, but over time it begins to progress so the liver becomes fibrotic, that is scarred. Then it can go from the scarred stage to severe scarring, which we call cirrhosis. And at that stage, if you don't stop what you're doing, you end up with destruction of the liver and needing a liver transplant. So the book is kind of focused on what you can do to prevent this progression and the things that we know are associated with the progression. Because number one, of course, is the Western diet. A lot of things that we eat cause inflammation and fatty accumulation in the liver. And we know it's also strongly connected to visceral fat. That is the fat around the intestines and abdominal organs. This diet, the high fructose corn syrup, is also connected to the consumption of MSG and these food excitotoxins. There's a researcher that I was in contact with that studied the combination of MSG and high fructose corn syrup and found there was a dramatic increase in both, that is fatty liver disease and accumulation of this visceral fat, the fat in the abdomen. That fat in the abdomen is different than all other fat in your body in that it produces intense inflammation everywhere. So it is a leading cause and part of this fatty liver progression to fibrosis and eventual cirrhosis. And we found there's a number of things associated with it also, like type 2 diabetes, consumption of alcohol, other dietary things like omega-6 fat consumption, corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, and canola oil. All of these are inflammatory oils if used in excess. And we also found that throughout this study, and the things I was reviewing in the book, was that your diet plays the number one role, and that is the consumption of your vegetables, consumption of omega-3 type fats, particularly the DHA. And when we look at people who have these diseases of the liver, the thing we find in common is that they have very low levels of magnesium in the liver. They have very low levels of zinc. They have low levels of DHA, which is the omega-3 fatty acid. And so the book is sort of designed to replace those things, correct these problems that lead to this fatty liver destruction, and particularly the progression to the severe stages. And what we find, even when you get to the stage of cirrhosis, there are things you can do to reverse it so that the liver becomes essentially normal or mostly normal. All of these elevated enzymes we see and inflammation markers we see reverse. And so what I'm using is some natural products that have been known for a good while and extensively studied, like curcumin and quercetin and valcholine and the omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin C and vitamin K. All of these things are known to reduce inflammation, heal the liver. And the interesting thing about the liver has the most regenerative capacity of any organ in the body. You can remove 2/3 of the liver and it can completely regenerate. So this shows that the power of this regeneration, what you need to do is stop damaging it. And that means change your diet, exercise regularly, lose the weight, don't eat foods and substances like alcohol and illicit drugs that damage the liver. If you're taking prescription drugs, limit them as much as possible, because all of those drugs are known to damage the liver and the kidneys and interfere with the liver function. So if you can reduce those prescription medications, you should do it. Be careful of your over-counter medications like Tylenol and acetaminophen and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like Advil. These things also cause significant liver damage, particularly the Tylenol, the acetaminophen group of compound. They produce a great deal of destruction and can lead to liver failure, complete liver failure. The compounds I recommend in the book can neutralize a lot of this damage by acetaminophen and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So that was kind of the purpose. Is I saw that the damage to the liver was increasing. We're exposed to a large number of compounds that damage the liver, like pesticides, herbicides. They're everywhere. People who use them in their yards. We find people with liver have high levels of the Roundup compound glyphosate. So this popularization of using Roundup around the house and in the yard is producing liver damage. And it's a considerable accumulated damage. These pesticides and herbicides are stored in some of the fatty tissue in the liver, so that there's continuous damage. So these are sort of the basic reasons for writing this book and the direction and focus of the book.
You know, you talked about high fructose corn syrup, and you know, a lot of the corn producers, the people who produce high fructose corn syrup, say it's no different from sugar, and actually a lot of medical agencies say that too. But you really strongly disagree with that. Can you present your argument?
Well, there's extensive literature from independent research. Now, all the research that says it's safe and backs up their argument is funded by their corporations. So that's tainted research. We call these ghost written articles. That is, they'll pay for the articles to be written to give the story they want. But independent researchers that are not connected financially to the high fructose corn syrup manufacturing have virtually all found this damage. And so this is something that's without question. And as I say, the researcher that I'm in contact with found that this combination, MSG and high fructose corn syrup, produces extensive damage to the liver and this progressive damage to the liver. So that's the difference. That research is tainted. That's cannot be depended upon.
How can people eat the right way? It looks like when we go to the store or when we go to a restaurant, there's high fructose corn syrup and MSG in everything. How can people get it out of their systems?
Well, the most important way is don't eat processed foods, because what you're seeing in the grocery store is the processed foods that put the high fructose corn syrup in. Now, some are smart enough and wise enough to leave it out and they advertise it on their product. It contains no high fructose corn syrup. So that's one way, but eat fresh fruits and vegetables, mainly the organic fruits and vegetables. Even if it's organic, you should wash it with a vegetable wash, because there's pesticides in the atmosphere that'll contaminate even to some degree, far less than the other, the organic produce. So you need to wash it with a vegetable wash. Watch the foods that we know are toxic to the liver, like excess consumption of red meat, things that have high sugar content. Reduce the amount of sugar you're consuming and high carbohydrate foods. Concentrate on your vegetables and the safe meats to eat. That's the best way to do it.
All right, this is fascinating information, and information that applies to each and every one of us. We all need to do better with our diets. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Russell Blaylock. The book is called The Liver Cure. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Russell Blaylock, author of the book, The Liver Cure. Dr. Blaylock, you talked about the dangers of high fructose corn syrup and also somewhat natural sweeteners, just like regular table sugar. But what about artificial sweeteners? Where do you come down on that as it pertains to the liver?
Well, fortunately, there's been rather extensive research on the artificial sweeteners, particularly aspartame, less so Splenda and some of these. But what we're seeing is that aspartame is a severe liver toxin, particularly when it's combined with MSG. In fact, combining MSG, which is ubiquitous in the processed foods, when you combine those two together, what we see is severe liver fat accumulation, inflammation in the liver, and a significant increase in visceral fat that we were talking about that produces the inflammation. So that combination is particularly bad. I use mainly monk fruit extract as a sweetener, which is safe and actually reduces inflammation. But things like saccharin is a significant liver toxin. Now, stevia is actually something that tends to reduce damage to the liver, but it has other things that are negative about it, particularly injury to the brain.
So really, where do people find monk fruit?
You can order it over Amazon, or a lot of the grocery stores are carrying monk fruit sweetener.
Straight monk fruit, because I've seen monk fruit in the grocery store combined with other sweeteners.
Yeah, you can get it pure. They do combine it with other things, like stevia is very commonly combined with it, but you can get the pure monk fruit.
When you talk about MSG, which stands for monosodium glutamate, and people should stay away from that. So what they do is they look in the list of ingredients for monosodium glutamate. Oftentimes they don't list it as MSG, so it's a little bit confusing. But what are some other names for MSG?
Well, what I call them as excitotoxin food additives, because some of them are not strictly MSG or glutamate. It's the glutamate compound that produces the damage in MSG. But they'll use disguised names like hydrolyzed vegetable protein, protein isolates, soy protein isolate, carrageenan, caseinate, sodium or potassium caseinate is common, enzymes. There's a whole host of names, a long list that I put in my original book, Excitotoxins, the Case that Kills. But this list keeps growing. And what they're trying to do, as people learn about the damage and danger of MSG, they come up with more disguised names. Natural flavoring is one used very commonly.
And isn't that also true with high fructose corn syrup? They sort of change the name a little bit and have various forms. Like, what about corn syrup?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's all of these manufacturers, as the public becomes educated into the dangers, they change the name of the product because they're making so much money they have no intention of removing it unless it just becomes so obvious they're forced to.
You know, a lot of people, sadly, are diagnosed with liver cancer these days. What are some of the ways to prevent liver cancer?
Well, the number one way, of course, is your diet, because what I show in the book is it's a progression in the liver from this fatty liver disease to the more fibrotic liver, which we call NASH, which is an abbreviation, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which just means it's fat inflammation producing this damage. And as you get to cirrhosis, the damage is more severe, the inflammation is more intense, and all cancers are triggered by inflammation. Obesity is one of the strongest connections to liver cancer. The second is diabetes. So those two things put you in the highest risk category. And of course, all of the liver damaging things like alcohol. So if you're obese and you're drinking, you really put yourself at a high risk. It's something like an 89% increased risk with obesity alone. Diabetes, it can be as much as 11-fold increase in liver cancer. So liver cancer doesn't occur in people who generally are healthy and eat the right things. It's occurring in people who have other comorbid diseases like type 2 diabetes, who are abusing alcohol, who are frail and aged. These are the things, these secondary things that are adding to the damage and keeping the liver highly inflamed. That's what's producing the cancer that we're seeing.
Liver cancer, right. Yeah. All right. We're going to take another quick break and be right back with Dr. Russell Blaylock. The book is called The Liver Cure. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living, and we're continuing our discussion with Dr. Russell Blaylock, author of the book, The Liver Cure. Dr. Blaylock, we know that so many people struggle with viral hepatitis, which is a condition of the liver. Can this be controlled or even treated properly?
Well, my research in that area was quite interesting. For instance, hepatitis B, which is a common form in other parts of the world, but it's least common in the United States. But we see 95% of people who are infected with hepatitis B, it will clear from the liver and you'll be cured doing absolutely nothing. So it's only a very small percentage of people with that hepatitis that's going to have a prolonged course. And what we find is a number of natural substances can prevent that virus from invading liver cells and from reproducing. So you can cure it with these natural compounds. Now, hepatitis C is more common in the United States, but even there, most of these cases can be cured with natural compounds and keeping your liver healthy. Don't abuse it with these nutritional things we were talking about. And most of the people can be cured with that, and most of the symptoms will subside. I've treated a case of hepatitis C in a young man when I was practicing in another area, and he was just devastated, couldn't work. And so I put him on some of these compounds, just a few of them, and his life changed. He just turned around. He said, I feel great. His liver enzymes fell to normal. The virus virtually disappeared and he was fine. So yes, you can change these cases of hepatitis with these natural compounds.
Dr. Blaylock, I'm going to ask you a question that is probably the most fundamental one, which is how do people eat healthy if they have, for example, limited mobility? We have a lot of people who don't have the strength or the help to cook for themselves, and so they buy the processed foods. What do you tell people like that who just really don't want to or can't cook for themselves?
Well, hopefully someone would take care of them and supply them with good foods. What we see in most cases like that is the people that are purchasing the food or preparing the food with all good intent are using processed foods and compounds that are known to be harmful because they're not aware that they are harmful. So it's educating the person taking care of them, who's preparing their food, who we need to approach.
We're going to take another quick break and be right back with more from Dr. Russell Blaylock, author of The Liver Cure. Stay tuned. And we're back continuing our discussion with Dr. Russell Blaylock, author of The Liver Cure. Doctor, you know, a lot of people, this is new information to them, even though they've been discussing their liver issues with their doctors. Why do a lot of doctors not address these issues with their patients?
Well, unfortunately, most medical practice in the United States and training of physicians in the United States is based on pharmaceutical medicine. And that's because the pharmaceutical companies fund most of the medical universities, residencies, internships, and this leads them away from these natural treatments. But the field of natural treatment of these diseases has just expanded enormously with really high-tech, very careful scientific studies showing the mechanism, how it cures these liver things, what effects it's having on liver cells, and reducing inflammation. And so these compounds, natural compounds, are far safer than any drug. And you have to remember, when you're taking a drug to treat your liver disease, your liver has to metabolize that drug. And so it puts the liver under even more stress, where with a natural compound, it's the opposite. It's actually improving the health of the liver cell while it's reducing inflammation and risk of cancer and progression of the liver disease. So it's the fact that the physician is not aware of this literature, they're not reading it, and they have not been trained and taught about it.
Where can folks get your book and more information about you and your other books?
Well, they can go to Amazon, which carries the bookstores are carrying the book. So it should be easy to find. I have several books. This is my 7th book that I've published. The previous one was on my prescriptions for a lot of different disorders other than just the liver. So yeah, it's available just about any reputable bookstore.
Well, Dr. Blaylock, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for the book. It's great information, and for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And once again, the book is called The Liver Cure by Dr. Russell Blaylock. And we're out of time for this edition of Healthy Living. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.